Up. Welcome to Today's Issues, offering a Christian response to the issues of the day. Here's your host, Tim Wildman, President of the American Family Association.
Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Today's Issues on the American Family Radio Network. Today's Issues is the name of this program on this Tuesday, October the 17th, 2023. In case you were wondering what to write on your checks today, for those of you who still write checks. Tim Wildman here with Fred Jackson. Good morning, Fred.
Good morning, Tim. You just made me feel so old.
Writing checks?
I still write a few.
I know.
And my daughter says, "Why are you doing that?" Because I've been used to it for so many years.
Right. Well, our long-lost friend Ray Pritchard joins us
Hey,
now.
Tim, how you doing?
World traveler. Where you been off to recently?
The last 3 weeks, upstate New York the first week, second week Oxford, Mississippi for that football game, and then last week we just got back from Chicago. Our ministry had a board retreat, so I'm just glad I survived the last 3 weeks and home now for about 3 weeks, and really happy about that.
Amen. So, is that it for the year, or you got more?
I've got one more trip to Oregon in about 3 weeks, and then just before Thanksgiving, going down to Texas to do a wedding, and then in early December, coming to the home base, coming to Tupelo for the big Christmas celebration.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing you in person. Now, Oregon, I thought you normally do that in the summer.
Yeah, I do, and they asked me if I would speak. Fred, you'll appreciate this, a retirees conference. You know, they're telling you something, aren't they, when they ask you to speak for a retire. I started my ministry doing youth retreats. Nobody's asked me to do a youth retreat in a long, long time, but I'm qualified to do the retirees conference.
Now, when you speak to retirees, you obviously you can't call out people who go to sleep during your talk.
But you got to get to the point fast.
Right.
No messing around, or they will drift off.
Right. That could be
really
20% of your audience. You know, you never know.
20% would be a low figure. It could be 40. Depending on the message, it could be 40 or 50.
Hey, wake up, people! Wake up! I didn't fly all the way to Oregon for you to sleep on me. Stand up, sir. You proud of yourself?
Yeah. Speaking of age, I got to mention this. Our own Charlie Butts.
Yeah.
One of our great reporters.
Yeah.
He had a birthday yesterday.
Okay.
A lot of people won't believe this. He turned 80.
80, still working.
So we've got an 80-year-old reporter.
Wow.
Yeah.
I remember
young.
with Charlie a few years ago, he was going to retire, right?
Yes.
And
officially, he is.
Yeah, but I remember you and I
Right.
had this conversation. We can't let Charlie
No.
sit at home all day
No.
and watch
No.
whatever you watch. So we got to. Charlie is very valuable to our team here. So anyway, he turns 80. We got to get him in here because he has a very interesting story and life story.
Oh, a life story. He worked with an atheist many, many years ago, Madeline Murray O'Hara.
Oh yeah, from the school prayer case.
Yes, Charlie got saved. He was in Dallas when President Kennedy was
Right.
shot. He was there when Jack Ruby shot Oswald.
Mm-hmm. You mean he was on site?
He was on site.
Wow.
He was in New York in 9/11. His plane had just landed from Jordan. He had been over to Jordan, one of those tours.
Right.
His plane landed in New York, and they said, well, your plane back to Dallas, Texas can't go because this happened. Charlie had his tape recorder, went downtown to New York shortly after, I think, the first plane went into the towers. And he was there to talk to people.
Yeah.
Just incredible.
Wow. He was born. He was doing what he was born to do, right? I mean, God.
Yes. He
put him in places that.
Yeah. And I believe Charlie is the premier pro-life reporter in this country right now.
Well, maybe next week.
Yeah.
See if we can get him in here.
Yeah. What a history.
Huh?
What a history.
All right. A lot to talk about today. Dr. Robert Jeffress, senior pastor of the First Baptist Church, Dallas, TX, will be with us at the bottom of the hour. We'll talk to him about Israel, about prophecy, and about his new book called The 10, talking about the 10 Commandments, How to Live and Love in a World That Has Lost Its Way. So we'll talk to Robert Jeffers at the bottom of the hour. Looking forward to that. Well, if you want to join us on the internet, you want to watch this year's show, go to, there's 3 ways now. You can go to our streaming service, streaming.afa.net. Go there, streaming.afa.net. We live video stream there, our show, and check that out. We also Facebook Live. Just type in today's issues. Also, we're back on YouTube. Brent, how can they watch on YouTube if they want to?
They go to YouTube and search for Today's Issues live stream.
Today's Issues live stream.
Yes, sir.
And we're back on YouTube. So
For now.
For now. Well, Ed didn't know today to say.
We're okay for today.
Right. To say Iber, and you know the rest of that word, people.
The I word.
The I word. All right. So, Fred, what's leading the news this morning?
Well, President Joe Biden will be in Israel tomorrow.
Does he know he's leading the news, Fred? I'm sorry. That was a low. I shouldn't start out the show taking a shot at the president like that. My apologies. Go ahead.
But he is going to Israel, and it is part of the show of support, and we can certainly celebrate this, of the United States for the nation of Israel, who, in the wake of what happened on October the 7th, the worst attack against Jewish people since the Holocaust. We have 2 carrier groups now that are parked off the Israeli coastline, and they have a lot of firepower. They are supplying the Israelis with weapons, ammunition that they need, and the president will go there tomorrow and show his support to the Israeli people.
Let me just say this, just as a personal note. I don't know how you guys feel. Of course, I disagree with Biden on everything.
Yes.
I mean, I can't name you one thing I agree with him on.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we might like the same type of ice cream. I don't know. But I will say this. I do commend him for this trip to Israel to stand in solidarity with the people of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know how much he knows it yet, but he's getting a huge backlash. The U.S. is getting, well, I say huge backlash. There is a backlash.
Yes.
Across some of the world,
mm-hmm.
and also domestically.
Yes.
And so I just commend him for going there physically in person. Now, any thoughts on that, Ray?
100% agree. God bless you, Mr. President.
Right.
It's a good thing for the President of the United States to go to Israel, our number one ally in the Middle East, the one true democracy in the Middle East. He's going into a war zone. He's putting himself, look, let's face it, given Hamas and Hezbollah, you don't really know where the safe place is over there. So God bless him. He is going to be in our prayers. We ought to pray for him as he goes, that he would be able to speak strongly on behalf of Israel. And I think he's going to Israel and then to Amman, Jordan after that. And,
oh, he is? I didn't know he's going to Jordan, too.
Yes, he is. Because this is kind of where the meter on this story is starting to move further and further to the left. Biden is facing opposition within his own party. In fact, the Washington Post, I just ran a story off just before coming in the studio. Washington Post running a story this morning, Democrats' unity starts cracking on Israel-Gaza conflict. There are now, according to this story, at least 50 members of the Democratic Party, House members primarily, who are expressing concern over Israel's plan to go into Gaza. Israel wants to put an end to Hamas. They have no interest in injuring innocent Palestinian citizens there. However, Hamas puts innocent men, women, and children in front of their guns, knowing that when an attack occurs from Israel, that those innocent citizens will be killed. And so what we're seeing now amongst these Democrats, they want Joe Biden to call upon Israel for a ceasefire. In other words, stop attacking Hamas, because there are Palestinian citizens within Gaza that are being killed. We're also starting to see pressure from the media. The media's focus on the story right now is all about Gaza and what's happening with those citizens in there. I would say out of 10 stories on this subject that I read this morning, 9 of them were portraying sympathy for those Palestinian citizens. Very little about what's happening with the Israeli soldiers, what's happening. A lot of people don't understand. Hamas is still firing missiles into Israel. As we sit here this morning, they are still firing missiles into Israel. Last night, Israel had to deal with Hezbollah members coming across the border from Lebanon. Fortunately, they got those guys last night. Now Iran is saying, Israel, you better behave yourself or we might do something. So this is, don't think because the narrative in the media is changing that the danger is any less for Israel.
Look, Hamas slaughtered 1,400 people.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Slaughtered them.
Yes.
1,400 people.
Unarmed.
And these were, most of these people, they weren't soldiers.
No.
They went into their houses and slit their throats and murdered them.
Yes.
In awful, I mean, you can't be murdered in a good way, but you know what I'm saying.
It was a massacre.
It was a massacre. This level of brutality was off the charts. So you got 1,400 of your people dead. What country doesn't fight back against that? And after 9/11, Ray, can you imagine after 9/11 and us listening to the world say, "Hey, America, you don't need to respond. You need a ceasefire here. You don't need to," you know what I'm saying? We would say, "Wait a minute, 3,000 of our citizens are dead. We're going to hunt down the people who did this." And, go ahead.
We had George
W. Bush
as president, then George W. Bush, and he said, "We're going to make you pay."
Right.
He didn't wait for permission from people on the other side. We sent the troops in, and it was a tough fight in Afghanistan, in Iraq, but at least we tried to make it right, to get the people who attacked us. And I will say this: it's interesting. Let me see how I say this the right way. Obviously, Israel is taking their time to get all their assets in place, but I do think at some point, guys. And it's not going to happen tomorrow or the next day, but some point soon, if they're actually going to go into Gaza with the troops, house to house and building to building, they're going to have to do that pretty soon, or else the pressure is going to build up almost unbearable for them to stop and not do it. But they're not going to, you can't just bomb Hamas out of existence. You're going to have to put the troops in to finish the job, right? So I think that's going to have to happen sooner rather than later.
And listen, I've mentioned this before, and I didn't create this phrase, but it's apt or apropos, however you want to say it. War is hell.
Yes.
War is hell, and innocent people die, sadly.
Yes.
Look what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. If you were to survey the people in Russia, if you were to survey the people in Ukraine, 99.9% of them don't want a war. They didn't want a war. They don't want to kill other people or have their families killed and be displaced. And so innocent people die or displaced or injured. It's horrible. Yeah. I saw pictures last night of some of the Arabs in Palestine, in the Gaza Strip, who were injured. Some of them were children, and it tore at your heartstrings.
Yes.
But at the same time, if Israel doesn't take out Hamas, then they're going to face the prospects of continued acts of terrorism, where their people can't have any kind of peace, can't live a normal life. So, in war, sometimes you have to make decisions that you know are going to probably kill innocent people, but if you don't, the worst is going to happen.
Yes.
Look what we did in. I don't want to bring up the exact moral equivalency here because I haven't thought it through. But look at the decision that we were faced with in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't FDR. Who decided to bomb Nagasaki and Hiroshima? Was it Truman?
It was Truman was the president, because
he was the one they came to and said, Mr. President, we have these new H-bombs, and we can drop them and stop Japan from make them surrender. And can you imagine he had to think about that. He had that on. What I'm saying is sometimes in war, you have to make decisions, Ray, that are messy. And anyway, does that make sense?
Well, if you say that no innocent people can ever be injured or hurt, and it is awful when that happens, then what you're saying is you can never respond. You can never respond. That's right. And I think Israel is doing what they can.
Right.
They have warned people in the northern part of Gaza, you'd better evacuate. And I guess hundreds of thousands of them have. Some people have decided to stay where they are. They're doing what they can. They're making the delay. I do think, frankly, they're going to have to go sooner rather than later.
Oh, yeah.
Well, they have to. And already Israel has gone beyond. First, they stated a 24-hour deadline. They've gone well beyond that now, allowing these citizens to move to the southern part of Gaza. But let's not fool ourselves. Hamas will just move its members into the southern part,
sure, and
there'll be missiles launched from there. Hamas does not care about those Palestinian men, women, and children. They don't. Mm-mm. They simply don't. They don't care how many of those. In fact, they have people videotaping the victims, the Palestinian victims, videotaping so that the world will see that and put pressure on Israel to withdraw.
And some people may wonder, well, why don't the Palestinian people, that is the Arabs who live in Gaza, why don't they rise up and overthrow Hamas, and so that they can so they can stop the firing of rockets into Israel, so that you can have some semblance of peace and order. Mm-hmm. Well, here's imagine this situation, because it's like this. Imagine a gang, or a gang controls your neighborhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if the gang figures out or gets the word that you're going to oppose them, guess what? They kill your family members, or they cut your dog's throat, hang it out in front of your house, or they threaten you in other ways. Mm-hmm. In other words, you don't dare speak out against the gang or the mob, because for fear of retaliation. And that's what Hamas is in Gaza. Yes, you may have I don't know. I don't think that most of the people in Gaza, they don't want to go through this, and they didn't. You know what I'm saying? But I'm not saying they aren't. I'm not saying they're pro-Israel. No. Don't get me wrong, but I'm saying that they don't have a chance really to express themselves in any different opinion other than what Hamas does. Otherwise, what I described as a mob or a gang does in a neighborhood will happen to them. Does that parallel make sense?
Absolutely. And it's like saying, World War II, you mentioned World War II, somebody saying, well, and there was a British politician, let's negotiate with the Nazis, and maybe they'll be nice with us.
Right.
Well, we have a long history of Israel saying, okay, we'll cease fire and we'll both go to our corners, but then all that does is allow the terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and various Fatah terrorist groups, they just rearm and come at it again.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the history here.
And the worst part of it...
You don't negotiate with somebody who has a knife to your throat. And that's what Hamas has in Gaza. They have the weapons.
Right.
And they have the willingness to use it. It reminds me, you use the gang metaphor, that's really a perfect analogy. There are neighborhoods in Chicago that are controlled by the gangs. Not saying every neighborhood, but there are parts of Chicago, right. There are parts of New York City that are controlled by the gangs. They have the money, they have the drugs, they have the power, they have the guns, and they call the shots. That's what Hamas is in Gaza. They've got the money, the power, and the guns.
Yeah, and I think at this moment in time, the Israeli population, they've had it. They've been divided among themselves about domestic policy and politicians. Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, he's not universally loved by Israelis. I mean, they've had their own divides, like we have Republican, Democrat here in the U.S. That's the best way to explain it. But they have a multi-party system over there. But I'll just say this: this moment in time, the Israelis have had it.
Yes.
And this isn't one or two or three rockets that were fired that we get every few months. This was a slaughter on a mass scale, and it was a declaration of war by Hamas, basically. And the Israeli people are ready to support Benjamin Netanyahu and their military to do whatever it takes to end Hamas in Gaza.
Yeah. Liberal Jewish people are calling on Netanyahu to continue this fight and finish the fight against Hamas.
Right.
His political enemies are now with him on this.
It's a us or you moment, so to speak.
It is.
I mean, it really is.
It is.
All right, you're listening to Today's Issues on the American Family Radio Network. Tim, Ray, and Fred. Again, Dr. Robert Jeffress will be with us at the bottom of the hour. So you mentioned that President Biden, is he en route now? When is he going?
No, tomorrow we're told he will be there, so I assume he may leave tonight.
Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, he's already been there.
There twice.
He's also meeting with regional heads of state like the Saudi Crown Prince. I'm assuming he's meeting with the Egyptian leadership, Jordan. In other words, he's doing what he can, that is Blinken, to try to keep the peace, keep the war between Hamas and Israel, and don't let it spread to other countries, right?
Yeah, and Iran is, the opposing threat from Iran is, all right, we'll get more involved, and what they're saying in that is they'll get Hezbollah more engaged in this on the northern border. So that is a possibility. Israel, I think, wants to take care of this itself. It appreciates the support of the United States for weapons, et cetera, et cetera. The United States is involved with this. There are 30 Americans now confirmed killed in that massacre last weekend. 30 Americans. About 14 or 15 Americans unknown. It is believed they are being held hostage. So America does have an investment in this.
I remember many years ago, I'll say many, probably 15 years ago, I was traveling in Israel with a tour group, and the gentleman who was our tour guide was an Arab Christian,
mm-hmm.
and he lived in Jericho. But he told me, he said, because the U.S. government has for years given money both to Israel, a lot more to Israel, but they also gave money to the Palestinian Authority,
yes,
which is different from Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
But they gave money to, because Hamas has been designated a terrorist organization by the U.S. government. Anyway, Ray, he told me, and Fred, he said, this is done he said, remember Yasser Arafat?
Yes.
Okay, he said to me, he said, Yasser Arafat and what was in the PLO, they took all this money, really from people from around the world, and basically they spent it on themselves.
Yes.
And he said if they had used the money to better the lives of the Palestinian people in the West Bank, he said we would have had peace, because they'd have had factories, they would have had jobs, they'd had nice schools and roads and all these things with all the money that they were given. But they wasted it, or they took it for themselves, and then they kept the people stirred up.
Yep.
Sounds a lot like Jesse Jackson.
Yeah.
But anyway, I digress.
Yep.
And Al Sharpton, I digress.
Yasser Arafat died with millions of dollars in Paris bank accounts.
And in the Swiss.
Yes.
In Swiss, remember, it was discovered all this money that was in Swiss bank accounts.
Mm-hmm.
But that was anyway. But this was a gentleman who was himself an Arab living in Israel, who knew the story.
Yes.
Of Yasser Arafat and the PLO, which preceded the Palestinian Authority. All right, we're going to come back with Dr. Robert Jeffress coming up in just a few minutes. Stay with us. You're listening to Today's Issues on the American Family Radio Network.
It's my turn.
Here is your host for My Turn, Don Wildman.
The city slicker had just driven up to the country store. He noticed a group of men sitting on one side of the store's porch, engaged in a game of checkers. On the other side of the porch was a fellow sitting in a rocking chair. The city slicker, who was at the store to make a big sale and turn a nice profit, decided he would go over and speak to the man in the chair. The man, who was enjoying a good chew of tobacco, had an old hound dog lying on the floor beside him. The city slicker, knowing something of the love that country people have for their dogs, decided that the way to impress the man in the chair was to be nice to the man's dog. So he walked over to where the man was sitting. "Howdy, mister," the city slicker said. "Does your dog bite?" he asked. "Nope," replied the man, giving a good strong spit of his chewing tobacco. The city slicker reached down to pat the dog on the head. The dog responded by biting the man's hand off. Finally, when the other men managed to get the dog off the city slicker, he spoke to the man in the chair again. "I thought you said that your dog didn't bite," the city slicker said. The country fellow, still sitting in his chair, gave another healthy tobacco spit and then spoke. "My dog don't bite. That ain't my dog." One of the tragedies of our age is our unwillingness to be helpful when we can. We see people who are headed for trouble, people whom we could be helpful to, and we simply make no effort to assist them. The Italian poet Dante once had this to say about such people: "He who sees a need and waits to be asked for help is as unkind as if he had refused it." Our generation is seemingly being influenced heavily by this policy of non-involvement. We see places where we could help, where our help is needed, and we turn away with the thought that that's none of my business. And that thought, that attitude is totally false. If you can be of help to your fellow man, and he needs your help, then it's some of your business. We're all part of the family of man, and that makes us all brothers and sisters. Our reason for being in the world is to make a difference, to make it better that we're here. And the finest way we can do that is to lend assistance where and when we can, to have an opportunity to do good. And to fail to take advantage of that opportunity is a reflection of a tragic flaw in our moral character. Non-involvement is a self-defeating attitude because the time will come for each of us when we ourselves will need the assistance of another. The Apostle Paul once wrote, "Be kind to each other." You know, that's still good sound advice today. And the carpenter himself said, "Treat others as you would want them to treat you." From experience, let me say that advice takes precedent over a policy of non-involvement any day of the week. In other words, if it isn't your dog, tell the man so.
This has been My Turn with Don Wildman, a production of the American Family Association.
Ask people if they think they'll go to heaven, and you'll likely hear, "Sure, I'm a good person." Sadly, just being a good person isn't good enough. Matthew White reminds us that decent, moral people who do all the things the world defines as good still fall short of God's standard unless they've accepted Jesus as their Savior. Take some time today and give your heart a checkup. Read Just a Reminder, Good People May Still Go to Hell at afa.net/thestand. afa.net/thestand.
Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." Matthew 19:14.
American Family Radio. This is today's issues. Email your comments to comments@afr.net. Past broadcasts of today's issues are available for listening and viewing in the archive at afr.net. Now, back to more of today's issues.
Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the radio program Today's Issues on the American Family Radio Network. Thanks for joining us here. I'm Tim Wildman with Fred Jackson. We're in our studios in Tupelo, Mississippi, and in Kansas City, Kansas is our colleague Ray Pritchard. And wherever you may be listening to AFR today, we thank you for tuning in. Well, one of the popular Bible teaching radio programs we have is heard each morning on AFR with Dr. Robert Jeffers, Senior Pastor of First Baptist Church, Dallas, and the show Pathway to victory. Robert's a frequent guest here on AFR. He's also a writer, and in addition to being a pastor, and he's got a new book out. We're gonna talk to him about that. Also, he doesn't know this yet, but he's staying longer than we invited him for because we're going to talk about other things as well. Robert, good morning to you, brother.
Good morning, Tim. Great to be with you.
How long did you budget for us this morning?
Well, you all said 10 minutes, but I'll do whatever you'd like to do.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you. We want to keep you to the top of the hour.
Okay.
If you got a funeral, just tell them to wait. Okay.
The body will hold.
They're not going anywhere.
That's all, Fred. That was bad.
That's terrible.
Oh, that was a bad joke by Fred right there. They're not going anywhere. Okay. So first of all, Robert, your new book out is called The 10: How to Live and Love in a World That Has Lost Its Way. Tell us about it.
Well, this is a look at the 10 Commandments, the 3,500-year-old 10 Commandments. And, Tim, most people would agree with the subtitle regardless of their political or spiritual persuasion. We're living in a world that has lost its way. And I think back to 1863 when our country was in the middle of a civil war, and Abraham Lincoln issued his first proclamation of prayer and repentance. And he asked in that proclamation, why is our nation being torn apart? And he answered his own question by saying, because we have forgotten God. And I think that's true today. You can boil down all of the problems we're facing as a nation to this one primary cause. We have tried to live life our own way instead of God's way. And I thought this is a relevant time to go back and look at the 3,500-year-old 10 Commandments that God gave to Israel. By the way, he gave them 3,500 years ago as Israel was preparing to enter the land. Listen to the left talking about the current crisis in the Middle East, and they talk about Israel being 75 years old. That's a crock. She's not 75 years old. She's thousands of years of age, as proven by the 10 Commandments.
I want to ask you, so you mentioned the 10 Commandments were given to the Israelites, but you're saying we should live by them today. These were for the Jews back in the Old Testament days, right? Not for us today.
Well, there are parts of the Old Testament that were for the Jews alone. Remember, when we talk about the law, it's an all-encompassing word that included the civil law, how Israel was to conduct itself as a nation. We don't live under a theocracy today. That's not relevant to us. There was the ceremonial law, the sacrifices. We don't do that today because Jesus is our final sacrifice. But we do keep the moral law. It transcends any nation, any people. It's for all people. And the way we know that is Jesus reiterated the 10 Commandments in his teachings in the Sermon on the Mount. There's only one of the 10 Commandments that Jesus never repeated, and that is remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. And I talk about that in the book. The reason he didn't mention that commandment is after the resurrection, the day of worship changed from Saturday to Sunday. But the principle still remains. We all need our own Sabbath when we focus on worshiping God, relaxing, and resisting work.
Okay, so I always say it this way, and correct me if I'm wrong, and then I know Fred has a comment and Ray does, or a question or a comment, but with respect to anything in the Old Testament, and especially like the 10 Commandments, if they are reinforced in the New Testament, then they are for us today as Christians, right? Go ahead. If they're reinforced, I mean, you mentioned Jesus reinforced, and Paul reinforced the 10 Commandments, so they are applicable to the and even on the Sermon on the Mount, you're talking about expanding on that.
That's right. And we are under the new covenant. And the new covenant keeps parts of the old covenant, the moral part, but it discards others. I mean, we don't go to worship to a temple on Saturdays with the bloody sacrifice. That's no longer applicable to us today.
Pastor Jeffers, it's Fred here. A certain well-known pastor in Georgia back in the last couple of years has said...
Is he going to go unnamed?
Going to unnamed.
Okay.
But I think Andy Stanley comes...
Well, but he's unnamed.
He's unnamed.
Yeah.
He said, he basically, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the Old Testament was no longer relevant. And he took a lot of flack for that. But I'm going to ask you to speculate. Why does he think that would appeal to an audience to say that the Old Testament is no longer relevant?
Well, I think we have to be clear. Relevant is not the right word. The Old Testament law is not applicable to us today. We are not under the old covenant. We're under a new covenant. But the Old Testament itself, if we're talking about the scripture, is very relevant because it's a picture of Jesus Christ. It doesn't mean we live under the requirements of the Old Testament, but it means that it's relevant in the fact that it points people to Jesus. You know, Paul used the illustration in Galatians that the law is like a schoolmaster that brings us to Christ. James says the law is like a mirror that shows us how dirty we are. If you look into a mirror in the morning, it reveals how dirty your face is, but it can't cleanse your face. Only Jesus Christ can wash us and make us into a new creation. So I think, I think it was a poor choice of words to say that the Old Testament is not relevant. We do not live under the old covenant, but the Old Testament is valuable in pointing us to Jesus Christ.
It's good to know because fried catfish on Friday night in the South is itself a religious experience. And if we got to do away with catfish and shrimp, we're in trouble here. All of us are. Go ahead, Ray. You have a question or comment?
I sure do. Robert, first of all, thank you for the sermon series that's underneath the book and for the book itself. We need all the help we can get today to get back to God's principles for living, and so appreciate what you've done here. I want to ask you about, there are 10 commandments here. I want to ask you about one that we don't think about much, this third commandment about where you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Yeah. I think even Christians, Robert, sometimes think, well, as long as I don't say a certain swear word, that's all I have to do. Is there a deeper meaning beyond just the swear words to the third commandment?
Well, it's great to talk to you, Ray. And yes, there is. To use God's name in vain, Eugene Merrill, the Old Testament scholar who's a member of our church, he says it means don't lift up the name of your God needlessly. You know, as you know, the Israelites would not even pronounce the name Yahweh. It was such a sacred name. And I think there are a lot of ways we take God's name in vain today. For example, to tell people, well, God told me that, you're to give $1,000 to the church, or God told me to build this building. A lot of times we'll invoke God's name to manipulate people. You better not do that unless God really told you to do something. I think I've taken God's name in vain by telling a joke, and we tell them all the time, about somebody goes to heaven and they stand before God and God says, blah, blah, blah. You should not use the name of God in a joking way. We ought to save God's name for reverent use and use it only in a reverential way.
Talking to Dr. Robert Jeffress. So the name of the book, his new book, is called The 10. I've got it right here in front of me. How to Live and Love in a World That Has Lost Its Way. Anything by Dr. Robert Jeffress we would commend to you, and especially his latest book. And obviously you can hear Pathway to Victory here on American Family Radio each morning at 6 a.m.
Before we go on, could I just say a basic misunderstanding people have about the Ten Commandments is they think the Ten Commandments were given to us by this cosmic killjoy named God who's trying to make us as miserable as possible. And I want to remind our audience that the Ten Commandments were given not for God's benefit, but for our benefit.
Yes.
They weren't meant to repress us, but to bless us. And I often tell the story of when we took our girls up to Pikes Peak. They were little, and we drove up to the top of Pikes Peak, and we got out, and there were no guardrails around the mountain. And our 5-year-old daughter, Julia, started running toward the edge as quickly as she could. And I instinctively yelled out, "Stop." Now, why did I tell her to stop? It wasn't because I was trying to rob her of some great, glorious experience. I was trying to keep her from killing herself and going over the edge. And the reason God gave us these 10 commandments were to be moral guardrails for our protection and the enhancement of our joy. And that's why they're so relevant for us today.
Absolutely. And how many people have we known in our lives who have violated the 10 commandments, and some with severe consequences? I don't know. I'm 60 years old. I've talked to many men in particular over the years who said, they committed adultery and it cost them their marriage and separated their family. And the pain in their voice is, I wish I'd have never done that. You know what I'm saying? And you say, well, that's a direct violation of the guardrail, to use your metaphor, that Scripture says we have to be faithful, and you can't commit adultery. You commit adultery, it can destroy your life. So anyway, great point. God gives us these commandments for our own good, for our own welfare. All right, let's. Like I said, can you stay for 15 more minutes?
You bet.
Okay. I want to talk about Israel, and then Ray and Fred. All three of you guys have written extensively, and Fred's taught on Israel and prophecy for many years, haven't you, Fred? Taught Sunday school classes on that and so forth. All right, so Robert, is this the end of the world we're seeing right now? How about that one?
Well, I'm going to do a shameless promotion of a new book we have coming out November 6th. Are we living in the end times? Biblical answers to 7 questions about the future. People are asking that question. I was on Fox last week talking about a poll that came out before this latest flare-up in the Middle East that said that 40% of Americans believe we're living in the end times. That's Christians and non-Christians alike, believing we're living in the end times. So what I can answer, Matthew 24:36 says, no man knows the hour or the day, but I think things are absolutely being set up for what will be the end of times. It could be next week. It could probably be the next century or the next millennium. But I believe things are being set up right now for the end times. And, one thing that has troubled Bible readers for a long time has been this. Why would the final world conflict we call Armageddon, why would the world forces descend on this little tiny nation that's no bigger than the state of New Jersey? How could that escalate into a world conflict? Well, I think what's happened with Israel right now shows how easy it would be for the superpowers of the world to descend upon Israel and go to war with one another. So whether this is the event or not, I don't know yet. But what I do know is it's setting up events for the final conflict that the Bible prophesies.
Okay, Fred, you go, and then Ray goes.
Pastor Jeffress, one of the things that has struck me, and in this particular incident, and we've certainly seen evidence of it down through history, but I'd like your take on the hatred that we are seeing for the Jewish people.
Yes.
Not only in various places, but on our college campuses in this country. People are supporting Hamas, are praising Hamas. They are talking about, from the river to the sea, which is just a way of explaining get rid of the whole state of Israel. Rationally, it is hard for us to understand this. In your opinion, what is behind this irrational hatred?
Part of it, there are two things. Part of it is just ignorance. People are ignorant of the truth. I hear the MSNBC people all of the time talking about the 75-year-old history of Israel. Israel is not 75 years old. It's thousands of years of age. I mean, God said to Abraham 4,000 years ago, I'm going to make you the father of a great nation. You may remember I had the privilege of doing the opening prayer for the embassy dedication in Jerusalem in 2018. And in my prayer, and Netanyahu was seated there, I reminded the people that God had chosen Israel thousands of years ago. God said to Israel, you are going to be my nation. You're going to be the apple of my eye. You're going to be an object lesson to the world of my love and power, and you have a promise of endurance forever. And what people don't realize is this is ultimately a spiritual conflict. God says, I'm going to establish Israel forever. Satan says, I'm going to show why God can't keep his promises. And for thousands of years, Satan has inspired people to try to destroy Israel, whether it was Herod or whether it was Pharaoh, whether it was Antiochus Epiphanes or Adolf Hitler. These are all satanically inspired people who think they can nullify the promises of God. And, of course, each of them have been destroyed in the process of trying to destroy Israel. Their nations crumbled while Israel endured. And I want to say this to our listeners right now. Make no mistake about it. Hamas and Iran, who sponsors Hamas, thinks they are waging war against Israel. Ultimately, they are waging war against God himself, and that's a war nobody can win.
Robert, right along that line, then, I want to ask you this question about the Jewish people in the plan of God. We know that Israel has been at the heart of God's plan since the days of Abraham and then Moses until now. Does God still have a place for the Jewish people and for the nation of Israel in the future?
Absolutely. And the promise of endurance of believing Israel is forever. Now, I think we have to make clear, you don't go to heaven because you're a Jew. The Bible is very clear. Paul was very clear. It's not your, and Jesus reiterated this, it's not a person's natural relationship to Abraham, his physical relationship that makes him a Jew. It's having the spiritual commitment that Abraham had. And when Paul says all Israel will be saved, I don't believe that's all of national Israel. I believe it's referring to all of believing Israel. The true Israel will be those who accept Christ as the Messiah. But I do believe God's promises to Israel in Genesis 12 of a land, a seed, and a blessing, I believe it's still applicable to all those who believe in the promises of God through Jesus Christ. So yes, God has a plan for Israel, and his plan is during the millennium when Christ returns and sets up his throne in Jerusalem, God will ultimately fulfill that promise of a land, a seed, and a blessing to believing Israel.
What's the name of the, did you call it, is it a book? What's coming out relative?
It's actually going to be, we are in the throes of getting it out as quickly as possible. It'll be advertised soon. It's called Are We Living in the End Times? Biblical Answers to 7 Questions About the Future.
Okay, I want to ask you, related to this, a couple questions we can discuss here. But the first one is, a lot of people are under the misconception, Robert, that somehow Israel, modern day Israel, was, booted. They booted the Palestinian country out of existence. Okay. That really, a lot of people have this. Occupiers and so forth like that. There was no Palestine there were what we call Palestinians today, which are really just Arabs who live there in the area, and they have lived there forever. But so have the Jews. But there was no Palestinian country. There was Jordan, there was Egypt, there was Syria, but there was no Palestinian quote country that they booted out. The UN booted out to set up a country for the Jews of the Israelis. Is that right?
Well, that's exactly right. And that's why the left has to keep talking about the 75-year history of Israel as if they just came out of nowhere and formed as a nation 75 years ago and in the process stole the land that belonged to the poor Palestinians.
Right.
We know from history and archaeology that Israel was in the land thousands of years ago. If you go right now to Israel and visit the city of David, they've got actual artifacts that show that King David was the king 1000 BC. That was 3,000 years ago. He was in the land. And so this whole narrative of Israel being a stealer, an occupier, depends upon Israel being 75 years old. The fact is, they are thousands of years of age. And yes, it's true that when Joshua led the people into the promised land, it's true there were occupiers there, but there is absolutely no evidence that the people who were in the land at the time had any connection to today's Arab people whatsoever. The term Palestine wasn't even developed until 100 AD under the Roman Emperor Hadrian as a way to disassociate the Jewish people from their land. And so, I mean, the whole narrative is based on false history that can't be supported by archaeology.
Right. So you know, all these people on the left, they want to support the indigenous people, right?
Right.
So here we are.
The indigenous people are Israel.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yes.
The children of Abraham. Go ahead,
That's right.
Fred.
That's right.
Fred, and then Ray, and then back to me.
Pastor Jefferson says we're sitting here chatting today. Vladimir Putin, Russian leader Vladimir Putin, is in Beijing, meeting with the Chinese leaders.
That's going to be helpful.
The early news reports coming out of there, they're good friends of Iran. We've heard reports earlier this week. Hamas leaders have been visiting in Turkey. You know, those countries. A lot of people are talking about Ezekiel 38, 37, 38, and 39. These countries coming together, going against Israel. That alliance seems to be building as we're talking about the Hamas attack against Israel. There's a lot happening right now.
There is, and you know, and Ray, I know, has written about this. There is a war between Gog and Magog, and there's a lot of speculation about who that is. But there's good evidence that at the first part of the 7-year tribulation, there's going to be an invasion of a coalition of Russia and Persia, which is today's Iran, against Israel. They will be unsuccessful. Israel will be saved from that invasion, and the world will see the power of God displayed. But I need to go ahead and point out one thing. There are some things that have to happen before the second coming. The rapture is imminent. It could happen at any moment. But for the second coming, 7 years later, there has to be an Antichrist. There has to be a peace treaty with Israel. And I think what we're setting up for right now, and I don't predict dates, but I think what we're setting up for is for a world leader who comes on the scene and says, I have the answer to the conflict in the Middle East. And whoever does that will be blessed. You know, the Antichrist comes to power not through force. He comes by acquiescence. People will voluntarily submit to his rule because of his unusual ability to broker a peace deal in the Middle East with Israel. But it only lasts for 3.5 years. The Antichrist breaks that peace treaty, turns against Israel, and we see the events that lead up to the Armageddon and to the return of Christ.
All right, so we're out of time. Not the world here. I just want to be careful. I didn't want to make it clear. I wasn't setting a date or a time. I was talking about this show in this hour. So Dr. Robert Jeffress has been our guest today. It's not Jeffers, people. Quit calling him Dr. Robert Jeffers. It's Jeffress, right? Am I right, Robert?
Yes.
I know you've given up. You gave up when you were 10 years old. Trying to correct people, but it's Jeffress, and we encourage you to pick up his books. Anything Dr. Jeffress writes is excellent. Hey, if people are in Dallas, can they visit the church on Sunday morning?
They can. And by the way, if you go to our website, ptv.org, we have a special section on Israel called Israel at War. And so you can see the latest there.
What is that website again?
ptv.org.
Okay. All right, Robert, have a great day, my friend. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. Fred, Ray, and yours truly, let's see. Are you staying?
I have to go. Steve will be here.
That's disappointing. Steve Paisley Jordahl will be in a few minutes. Stay with us.
Yeah.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
Audio speed.
Camera speed.
Action.
American Family Studios is made up of a team of producers, directors, and writers.
Austin Brooks, director of American Family Studios.
The heart of what we do at American Family Studios is to support and affirm the mission of American Family Association.
American Family Studios products are available at afastore.net.
This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. President Joe Biden is set to visit Israel and Jordan on Wednesday amid the Israel-Hamas war. Jackie Heinrich reports from the White House.
The president's big focus here is to really show U.S. support for Israel and our, quote, ironclad commitment to Israel's security as it begins to root out Hamas and defend itself against future attacks. The president will also travel to Jordan, where he is expected to exert pressure on the Egyptian president to allow civilian safe passage through the Rafah crossing for folks to get out of Gaza and out of harm's way. But U.S. officials appear quite concerned that a second front could potentially open in this war. They have been exerting significant pressure on actors like Iran not to stoke any further action through its proxies like Hezbollah.
The U.S. is boosting its presence in Israel as that country continues to fight off attacks from Hamas. Rich Edson has more.
Aircraft carriers, warplanes, munitions, and now thousands of U.S. troops told that in 24 hours they could be deploying, though it's not confirmed yet. But this went out from the Pentagon, the deputy press secretary saying, quote, Secretary Austin placed approximately 2,000 personnel and a range of units on a heightened state of readiness, though through a prepare to deploy order, which increases DoD's ability to respond quickly to the evolving security environment in the Middle East. No decisions have been made to deploy any forces at this time. CENTCOM's former commander says they could help equip Israeli forces.
Parents should pay attention to anti-Semitism and other issues going on in America's colleges and universities. Chris Woodward has more.
Zachary Marshall, editor-in-chief of Campus Reform, says the anti-Semitism we're seeing on college campuses right now has been fueling in lecture halls, student clubs, and professors' papers for the last 2 generations.
This is the culmination and the result of 40 years of unchecked anti-Semitic teaching and activism in higher education. And for people who don't know what to make of it right now, what you're seeing is what your tuition dollars have been paying for, because no one is holding universities accountable.
Campus examples offered by Marshall include Cal State University Long Beach having images of the paraglider that killed people at a festival in Israel.
We've seen people at UCLA call for intifada. We have seen bed sheets sprayed with anti-Jewish messaging at Stanford University. A Jewish student's door was burned at Drexel University, and then an Israeli student, Columbia University, was physically attacked. So this is happening on every campus, large, small, public, or Ivy League.
I'm Chris Woodward.
New Jersey became the first state in the nation to mandate climate change content in public school curriculum. Now, the New Jersey Board of Education has taken that a step further. Bob Kellogg explains.
The board, on a 6-4 vote, said not only will climate change be taught in science and world history, they've added it to math and language arts. New Jersey resident and political commentator Joe Connor says school officials deceptively claim they have no class on climate change.
What they don't tell you is that when they do a math problem or when they do a reading assignment, that's what it's about. So they put it under the guise of math or language arts.
Connor's wife has taught in public schools for years and says teachers are also hoodwinked.
What they don't even explain to the teachers is that it's an indoctrination introduction. So it's so insidious in that way. I mean, we all have to be on the lookout all the time for the constant pounding from all directions of this liberal agenda.
Board Vice President Andrew Movihil voted against the measure, saying it kind of smells of indoctrination. I'm Bob Kellogg.
And Americans kept on spending in September, even as they grappled with higher prices, interest rates, and a host of other headwinds. Retail sales rose 0.7% in September, according to the Commerce Department. More news online at afn.net and on the AFN mobile app. I'm Rusty Pugh.
The FACE Act, Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, was signed into law by President Bill Clinton. Since Roe v. Wade was overturned last year, the DOJ has used it as a tool to terrorize pro-life advocates who wish to peacefully plead with women to save the lives of their unborn children. Congressman Chip Roy has introduced a bill to repeal the FACE Act. Will you contact your representative and urge them to support H.R. 5577? Find out more at afa.net.
Today's Issues continues on AFR with your host, Tim Wildman, President of the American Family Association.
Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the radio program Today's Issues on the American Family Radio Network. I'm Tim Wildman with Fred Jackson, and Steve Paisley-Jordahl's in studio now. Good morning, Steve.
Hello. Hey, good morning, everybody.
Ray Pritchard's in Kansas City, KS.
Hey, Tim. How are you?
So what's the weather like today where you are?
60 degrees and sunny, going up to 67. This is bike riding heaven.
Okay.
This is good.
Hit the trail this afternoon for how many miles?
Oh, about 15,
50. Is that 45 minutes? What is that?
About an hour and 15 minutes.
One little challenge, Ray. It's 64 degrees here, going up to 72. You come on down.
Come on down. I like it. It's beautiful weather.
If you can ride your bike from Kansas City to Tupelo, I'm looking at three guys who will take you to dinner.
Absolutely.
You got a deal. Buy me a steak. I'm on my way.
The problem is the Ozarks.
That's right. Boy, there's some big hills. Some big hills.
It's okay when you get to the Delta.
That's right. It's no problem. We can do that.
Up and down those Ozark mountains and hills, that's tough for a car.
Mm-hmm.
Huh?
I'll be there in April, maybe.
Oh, me. Hey, listen, a couple things. Number one is we have set the dates for our 2024 Spiritual Heritage Tours. So if you're looking for something, a vacation with a purpose next year, we would love for you to join us. We've taken literally thousands and thousands of people over the years to our nation's capital and to Mount Vernon. And then we have a separate trip to Colonial Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown. Jamestown, Yorktown, and Williamsburg, so much history there, and it's so meaningful to our country's beginnings. And, of course, Mount Vernon, and then our nation's capital. We'll see all the sites in our nation's capital. So we're doing those tours in June and September, as we always do. It's the best weather time of the year to go, June and September. So if you want to see the dates, the itinerary, the cost, everything about those trips that we're going to go on with Stephen McDowell, the Providence Foundation, just go to this website, spiritualheritagetours.com. spiritualheritagetours.com, and you can read all about the tours and the places we go, the things we do, the sites we see. And you won't find any other tour of our nation's capital or of Williamsburg with a historian, I don't think, especially one like Stephen McDowell, who tells you the Christian history and heritage of our nation as well. So spiritualheritagetours.com is the website. Steve's going to bring us the news of the hour about the House of Representatives and the Speaker's job. But before that, and Ray, you didn't know I was going to ask you this, but I do want to ask you this before we leave this topic. We were talking last half hour about world events, especially Israel, Bible prophecy, and I've talked about this before, but I think it bears repeating because it only points to the spiritual nature of what's happening with respect to Israel right now, and that is this. Iran is the one funding Hezbollah and Hamas. Iran is the one now threatening to cause a, quote, earthquake in Israel if Israel invades Gaza. And so you just think to yourself, what does Iran care? about Israel. They're 1,000 miles away. There's no historical border conflict, obviously, between Iran and
they're not even Arab.
Israel. Yeah, they're not Arabs. They have no, they don't even probably even speak the same language as Hezbollah or Hamas, for example. It's just there's no natural resources that Israel has that Iran's trying to get to. It really just makes no sense in the natural. I've said it's like this. It's like us. Imagine our president saying today, you know what? We will death to Peru. You know, all Peruvians must die. They're little Satans, and us. You know, people in the other world. Wait, you're not even. What do you have to do with Peru? What do you care what happens in Peru? Anyway, talk about that for just a moment. Why does Iran care about Israel?
You know, we have already talked early in the program, Tim, about the people of Gaza versus Hamas, and how Hamas is like a gang, an evil gang that has corrupted the whole Gaza region. But it doesn't mean that everybody in Gaza hates the Jewish people. Maybe a lot of them do, but not all of them do. Persia, in the same, well, Iran, of course, is a modern name for the ancient kingdom of Persia, one of the oldest kingdoms on earth. A beautiful land, beautiful people. You know, that it was Cyrus, the leader of the Persian kingdom, that God called him Cyrus, my servant. He's the one who let the Jewish people go back home at the end of the 70 years. And so there's every reason for there to be friendship between Iran and Israel. And what has happened is these clerics over there, these radical.
The mullahs?
Yes. That they have taken control of that beautiful land. And I say that beautiful land,
right?
Wonderful people over there, but they have taken control. And with their hardline radical ideology, I'm thinking about how to say this, Fred, but they believe that by somehow attacking Israel and wiping it off the face of the earth, they will bring back that final Mahdi, that final Islamic ruler who will establish Islam as a world religion. Okay, that's what they think they are doing God's will by wiping out the Jewish people, and they're the ones who are in control over in Iran, which means, Tim, you've already alluded to Putin and China. That's scary enough by itself, but you throw Iran into that mix, that's extremely destabilizing for the Middle East. And I guarantee you, when President Biden is in Israel, a lot of time talking about not just Hezbollah and Hamas, but what's happening with Iran. It's a very, very dangerous situation.
All right, well, we can talk more about this later. Steve, the next news story.
Well, as we speak, the House of Representatives is convening. They're now taking a vote on whether they
right now,
whether they have a quorum. And after that, they're going to, the Republicans are going to nominate Jim Jordan as Speaker. The Democrats are going to nominate Hakeem Jeffries. And we are going to have somewhat of a repeat of what we saw at the beginning of the year when they elected Kevin McCarthy. Now, will it take 10 votes? I don't know. The math is a little uncertain. I don't know that they would call this if they didn't think that there's a good chance that Jim Jordan would.
Well, it didn't take 10 votes in the full House, right?
Yeah.
No.
To get McCarthy.
To get McCarthy. Yeah.
Okay.
Back in the.
Okay, I'm gonna ask this again, and I will yield to y'all's proper recollection. If I remember correctly, it was within the Republicans only that it took 10 votes or whatever it was to get Kevin McCarthy. And then they put his name up before the full House of Representatives. But y'all are saying, no, that was 10 votes before the full House?
Oh, yeah. I remember the debates going on the floor.
But how do you have 10 votes if it's one or the other?
Well, because you can vote for anybody you want. You have to have 50% plus
All right,
one.
whatever y'all say. That's what I say to my wife.
Some people were nominating.
It doesn't work, but that's what I say.
Right.
And I immediately when I say that, I realize I shouldn't have said that. It's a bad attitude, but when I think I'm right, I gotta say something.
Yeah, it doesn't work out.
So
too
Ray,
well.
we're going to find out how this, if I'm right or wrong, and I can certainly be wrong. 3 times this year I've been wrong already. What do you say, Ray? Whose side are you on this?
Oh, I'm with Steve and Fred.
Okay.
I think.
All right.
I probably should be with you, but I think they're right.
All right, I'm going to put Brent Creeley, our producer, on this question, and you find out the answer, or do you know it already?
Before the whole House, it was 15 votes, I think.
All right. All right.
That's the
Then
fourth
I
time this year.
apologize for my attitude.
I just remember the drama
Yeah.
on live TV on the floor of the House.
Yeah,
with-
but do you understand what I'm saying? That if you have somebody has to be the House of Representatives Speaker,
Yes.
and you have one or the other, somebody wins in one vote.
Because you can nominate Jim Jordan and you can nominate Hakeem Jeffries and you can still go up and vote for Donald Trump to be Speaker of the House.
All right. Well, my bad. Somewhat apologize. Let's move on. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, so anyway, I got a couple. I talked to a friend of mine who is a representative from Indiana. His name is Jim Banks. He's congressman from Indiana, and he's talked to me about this was yesterday. He talked about the process, what they've been through, and what he hopes for. Listen to cut 9.
I thought it was a big mistake to vacate the speaker, but it happened. So Jim Jordan will be the strongest Speaker of the House that I've ever served with. He's got backbone. He doesn't back down to the radical left. He doesn't back down from the fight. That's exactly what we need in the next Speaker of the House, and that's why I'm proud to support him.
Jim is part of the Republican Study Caucus, and Jim Banks, and Jim Jordan is part of the Freedom Caucus. So they're not even the same caucus of Republicans. They agree on most of the things. And by the way, it just occurred to me, these were the 2 men that Nancy Pelosi would not let on the 9/11 Commission. Both of these guys.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, that just occurred to me. So,
So the vote will the vote be over before we get through here?
No.
Oh.
No, there's got another 5 minutes for the quorum, and then they're going to have nominating speeches, and it will not be done by the time we're done here, unless you want to tell Alistair Begg that he has to stand by.
All right, go ahead. Next topic.
I want to go back to what's going on in Israel, if I could. First thing I want to do is I want to talk about what's happening. You know, Israel gave 24 hours, it's more than that now, and told civilians, get out, evacuate. We're going to be bombing where you're at, and you stand a chance of not surviving, so go. A warning that Hamas certainly did not give to Israel. And so a lot of people are saying, well, where are they going to go? Where are they going to go? They're only targeting, they say, the northern part of Gaza, so they could all funnel down into the south, but it's still crowded down there. People ask, why not Egypt? You know, they can just keep going south. Well, King Abdullah of Jordan was in Germany, and this is what he said. He said, neither Jordan nor Egypt would accept Palestinian refugees from Gaza, where more than 1 million people have been displaced by the war. Quote, no refugees in Jordan, no refugees in Egypt. This is a red line because I think that the plan by certain of the usual suspects is to try and create de facto issues on the ground.
I'm not sure what that means, but it doesn't surprise me that Jordan and Egypt will not take refugees, because in reality, their ideology says, no, that land of Israel belongs to the Palestinian people. And so if we take the refugees, that diminishes their presence there in the land. That's my take on that.
You're probably right. My take on what it says is de facto issues on the ground is they are afraid that among the refugees, this is my thought, among the refugees are going to be a certain amount of people who are going to cause trouble, terrorists, who are going to be either Israel knows that is there,
correct.
and that they're going to cause havoc. they don't want them to cross the border. Our border is being crossed thousands of times a day by people we don't know who. Just saying.
Yeah. Listen, Egypt doesn't want the Palestinians coming into their country in mass, but they're about to have it anyway, quite frankly. The Saudis, they don't have any interest in this. Now, you would have to go down. I mean, Saudi.
Syria.
Yeah. Then you got the Jordan, obviously, is a border country with Israel. And a lot of Palestinians from years gone by, the wars, refugees live in Jordan already, but they don't want to, they don't know what they. First of all, you can have a humanitarian crisis of mass proportions on your hand. Secondly, you would have Jordan's been at peace with Israel. They don't want to bring in troublemakers who are going to cause that peace to go away. And Egypt's the same way, quite frankly. They know there's some bad players with Hamas, and they don't want any part of that, and they don't want it coming into their country. Remember, Egypt had a problem with the Muslim Brotherhood a few years ago. Well, they're like the Hamas. I mean, they're for imposing Sharia law. They're Al Qaeda type people. They're ISIS type people. So they don't want that in their countries, even though they're predominantly Muslim themselves. But they don't want war. They don't want to have fighting inside their own, terrorist activities inside their own countries. So, no, they're going to resist. Now, however, it does show the hypocrisy of these countries when, to me, and the rest of the world, quite frankly, when they want to condemn Israel, and yet they don't want to help settle these people anywhere else. You take them, you take them, you deal with the terrorists, but we don't want them in our country, but we're going to condemn you for wiping them out. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a real dilemma. Now, listen, this is about to get really, really ugly because Israel is bombing Gaza. It's already a small place. I don't know how many miles. How many miles? Do you know how long it is, Ray?
What, 25, 30 miles?
25 or 30 miles. A strip,
yeah.
Which used to belong to Egypt.
Right.
Used to belong to Egypt, the Gaza did. Okay, so imagine 25, 30 miles. Get out in your car here. In 20 minutes, you've driven that far, right? So imagine 2 million people congested into this area. And now Israel is bombing and telling people to move south. Well, it's not that easy. Now, again, I am not saying Israel's doing anything wrong because it's war. War is hell. And they've got to win this fight to Hamas. So they've got to have their own objectives. And quite frankly, they can't do a lot of considerations for anything else. And this isn't a perfect world. But I'm just telling you the practical reality is you've got a couple million people packed into a small area of land, and Israel's bombing is pushing them all into one it's a bottleneck, and the neck isn't open. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So you're going to have, that's why I'm saying it's about to get really ugly. There's going to be a lot of pressure on Israel to relent because a lot of innocent people, I say innocent people, I'm saying these Palestinians, they're going to die. They're going to die with these bombardments. And if Israel goes in there with their tanks and troops, you're going to have guerrilla warfare. I mean, it's just about to get really ugly in Gaza. And the only escape would be into Egypt. And if Egypt shuts these people off, I'm talking about as refugees, I don't know what they're going to do. Because how does Egypt stop them from coming into their country? Are they going to shoot them? Is Egypt going to start shooting the Palestinian people who are trying to flee war in Gaza? Is that going to happen? You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I'm just describing, I think, the reality of the situation. It's about to get really hard to watch.
And if I could remind people why they are going in with such vengeance. Sky News has been talking to people. They talked to a gentleman who his job, their group, goes and recovers bodies in war zones. And he is saying that it is becoming clear that the tactics and level of brutality of the Palestinians is something that they have not seen.
Of Hamas.
Of Hamas, I'm sorry. They were always much more like a militia at war with Israel is what they were, he said. Not bloodthirsty killers and torturers, but something has changed. And this article, I can't talk about what they did, what this article says, the torture that these civilians, when they had the time, they would torture and kill men, women, and children for hours before.
Oh, the butchery of that day will forever be remembered, second only to the Holocaust for a number of deaths by Jews and 1,400 people slaughtered.
But the torture.
Oh, I know. These people are sadistic. They're listen. They're controlled by Satan himself, and I don't say that casually.
No, I agree.
The only way I see out of this is at some point the Hamas terrorists in Gaza back down. The leadership, Israel takes them out. The followers, they back down, and Israel perhaps can withdraw. That is the only way that I see. Otherwise, and I'm not saying that's imminent. I'm afraid not. But that is the only way the rest of the Hamas followers would back away if Israel kills all of the Hamas leadership.
Well, and part of the problem there, Fred, is they're not all in Gaza.
No.
The some of the senior Hamas leadership is in Iran. Some of it is in Europe, in countries in Europe. They are spread out around the world. We got to assume, we don't know, but we got to assume that Israeli special forces are moving in on some of them. So you've got to. This is a very difficult. Besides the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding and about to unfold, Tim, you said it. I mean, you said it eloquently. I think that to disarm Hamas, the battle is going to be mainly in Gaza, but it's going to be in places like Iran. Some of them are in Egypt. Some of them they're just scattered. It's going to be tough to wipe out Hamas, but I think Mr. Netanyahu has the nation behind him that this time they're going to stay with it till they get the job done.
You know, the tragedy is, one of the tragedies here is that vast swaths of people, millions of people in Gaza, millions of people in Iran are controlled by a tiny number of people. And this tiny number of people, I'm talking about the mullahs, the Islamic religious leaders in Iran, which they're dictators. They impose Sharia law, and they're dangerous, very dangerous. You can't reason with these people, really, because they think they're on a mission from Allah. So that same way in Gaza, you know, you got a tiny percentage of people that committed these acts. I'm talking about of the people in Gaza, and they kept it a secret. So, but yet here a lot of people are having to pay the price for the actions of a few. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying the people in Gaza don't have sympathetic feelings for the things Hamas says or does. Although I read where they only got like 45% of the vote when they voted on. Did you see that? Have you seen that number? I'm talking about among the Palestinians who live in Gaza. So anyway, earnestly pray for that whole situation, because as Ed says, that's a tinderbox.
It is.
That's a tinderbox right now. The Middle East is. All right. Thanks for listening to American Family Radio on this show, Today's Issues. Thank you, Fred.
You bet.
Thank you, Steve.
My pleasure.
And thank you, Ray.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Tim.
All right, everybody. Keep listening to AFR. We hope you have a great rest of your day. And we will see you back here tomorrow.
This is Walker Wildman with AFR, and we're sending Bibles. Here's Michael with Bible League International.
Walker, in the Middle East, a 19-year-old Muslim named Aria accepted the invitation of a Christian friend to attend a Bible study. She would receive Jesus as Lord and Savior, but her radicalized father, when he found out, beat her nearly to death and called the authorities to report her as an infidel. They took her away to a remote cell where they violated her, they beat her, they tortured her, even pulled fingernails out of both hands. They let her go, but she did not grow bitter. She grew bold, and with others in her evangelical church there in Egypt, have led 300 people to Christ, many of these former Muslims, some radicalized, and they're praying for Bibles. Listen, every gift made today